This show is produced by the Harwood Podcast Network.
Hi, I'm Cindy Harris, and we love making this show available to you free of charge. If you'd like to help us keep it that way, make a contribution to our Karma Jar or become a show sponsor. To learn more, visit our website. Well, this could be one of the most awesome things I've ever made. Pie in a jar. That, along with this delicious tart cherry filling. Now, if you want to follow along with the recipe while I create these little beauties, just get your smartphone and scan the QR code here on the screen and the recipe will pop right up for you. I'm going to begin by making my cherry filling because I want that to be totally cool when we put it into our jars. Now, cherry filling has been one of those things that is very elusive in the cooking world. Just about every grocery store has a can of cherry pie filling, but it's not very good tasting, and many of us for a long time didn't know how to make it. Well, this recipe that I've come up with is so easy, and it's seriously so delicious. All you need to get is about 1.5 cups of tart cherries. Don't get Bing cherries, those are sweet. We need them to be tart for this filling. Now, I can't get fresh tart cherries where I live, hardly at all, but they do have them that are canned. This is a 14-ounce can, and these are tart cherries, and they are in a cherry juice. I'm going to put the whole can right in a little saucepan. And to the cherries, I'll stir in 1/2 cup of sugar and 2 tablespoons of cornstarch. Now, normally when you see me use cornstarch, I'm always mixing it with water and then putting it in whatever I'm making. Well, the reason is you have to do that if the mixture you're putting it in is already hot. This isn't, it's at room temperature. So I can stir that cornstarch in, and this is going to dissolve beautifully. And I'll bring the pan over to the stove. I have it on a medium-high heat, and I need to bring this to boil. Now remember, cornstarch doesn't start to thicken until the liquid it's in starts to boil. So I'm just going to stay with this and stir. Now after about 7 or 8 minutes, you can see it's starting to thicken up. The juices are running a little bit more clear. It's starting to boil, and I'm going to let this sit here and I'll stir it until it gets really thick. That's been about 8 minutes. I'll turn the heat off. I'm going to add 1/8 teaspoon of almond extract and just 2 or 3 drops of red food coloring. As I stir that around, see, this is the kind of color I'm looking for. Now I'm going to bring this off the heat, and I have a little medium-sized bowl here. I'm going to pour that off. I want this filling to start cooling, and if I leave it in the pan, the heat that's trapped in the metal here of the pan is just going to keep it warm for a really long time. So I'll let this sit out at room temperature until it's totally cooled down. Now this is just a little side note, but this ends up making about 2 cups of cherry filling. If I were going to be making a full-size pie, I would just double this recipe, and that would be plenty. Now we're going to make our pie crust. If you've watched any of my other podcasts, you know that I'm a fanatic about a good tasting pie crust. Flaky is important, but taste is everything as far as I'm concerned, because if I'm going to go to the trouble of making a pie and the crust is a big part of it, I need it to taste fantastic. So my suggestion is, if you're only going to learn how to make one pie crust, this is the one you're going to want to learn to make. It's super easy to deal with, and the taste, you can change the flavorings in it to enhance whatever your filling is. Now I'm going to be making mine in my standing mixer, but you could certainly use a hand mixer if you want. And I have 1 cup of butter. I'm going to cut it into cubes and add it to the bowl, along with 1/2 cup of butter. And I'm going to let this cream together. It usually takes about a minute or two. You can see that's nice and fluffy. To that, I'm going to add just a pinch of salt, 1 egg, and a teaspoon of vanilla. I'll put this on a low speed and let it combine. And now I'm going to add my flour. I'm just using an all-purpose flour. I'm going to dip it, level it off, and I'll measure out 2 1/4 cups of flour and put that into my mixing bowl. I'll put this on a low speed because I don't want the flour flying around the kitchen, just until it all combines. Now, as you see, as it comes together, it almost starts to make a ball. Now, I have a piece of plastic wrap out on my board. I'm going to take my pastry and just put it right in the center. And then I'll wrap the plastic around it, kind of pull it together with my hands. You'll see I'm not adding any more flour. I'm going to press it out into a disc like this, and I'll put this in the refrigerator and let it chill for an hour. Now, if you wanted to, you could let this chill overnight if you wanted to make your pies in a jar tomorrow. But for today, just an hour will do. Now, while everything is chilling down, let's talk about our jars. I have some half-pint jars, and these are a wide mouth. You'll notice they go straight up. Some canning jars kind of bend in. We don't want that. We want jars that go straight up, nice wide mouth. You'll want to have a ring and also a lid for each jar. Now, because these are canning jars, the glass is really thick and they're meant to deal with high heats. Now, we're not going to be sterilizing these jars because we're either going to be baking the pies immediately or putting them in the freezer. So I just run them through the dishwasher and that works out fine. In fact, I've used all of these jars and lids and rims before, so you can just keep using the set over and over again. Now, to move the jars around easily, I have a rimmed baking sheet with a piece of parchment on it that helps the jars not slide around too much. Now, this recipe makes 4 pies, so I'll put 4 of my jars right on the parchment. Now it's time to start working with our pastry. Now, this round was in the refrigerator for just 1 hour, so it's nice and stiff but still pliable enough to where I can roll it out easily. If this was either in the freezer or in the refrigerator overnight, I would definitely want to let it sit out for 15 or 20 minutes just on the counter just to take that initial chill off. I find if the dough is too cold, it makes it a little hard to roll out, and we want this to be as easy as pie. I'm going to begin by unwrapping my dough and just breaking off a piece of dough. And we're going to use this almost like clay. Now, the dough is pretty easy to work with, but if you find it's just a teeny bit sticky, put a little bit of flour on, and I'm going to squish it out with my hands, just like this. And then I'm going to take one of the jars, I'm going to put the dough right in, and then flour my thumb, and I'm going to press that dough in the bottom and all the way up the sides of the jar. Make sure you're getting a thin layer of pastry inside the jar. We want to make sure we have lots of room for our delicious filling. And like any pie crust, I make sure to press way into the corner of the jar. Sometimes when you're doing pastry, it kind of wants to skip over that 45-degree angle, and we want to really make sure that we get that dough pressed out. And I'll bring it all the way up, like here where this is kind of hanging over. I'm going to just scrape that off with my thumb. So this looks great. It's all the way in the bottom. I can see the bottom here with the glass. There's no gaps or holes in the pastry. Comes right up, but this is nice and clean. I can actually rub my finger on it. I feel no pastry at all. That's perfect. So I'll set that on my pan, and I'll do the same thing with the other 3 jars. So I have 4 pastry-lined jars on my sheet, and I still have some dough left over. We'll use these to roll out our little tops. On my board, I'll sprinkle out some flour. Put some on my rolling pin, and I'll roll this out, between 1/8 and 1/4 of an inch. Make sure that you can easily move the pastry on your board. Now to cut out the little tops, I'll use just the rings that go on top of the jar, and I'll use it like a cookie cutter. And I'll cut 4 of those out. And with the rest of the scraps, what I do is I gather them together and I wrap them up in plastic and put them in the freezer. And I make sure to label the bag that they're in, because this can make another set of pies or a free-form tart or anything else. So don't get rid of this dough. Definitely use it for another purpose. Now we have our 4 little tops. We will want to make some sort of little cutout in the center so that the steam can vent as the pie is baking. So here's a couple of ideas. If you have a small little cookie cutter like this, you could certainly use this. I've just found these really cute little spring-loaded cookie cutters, and this is actually 2 little cherries. So I'm going to use this today. I'm going to put it right in the center of one of my tops, press down, and then press the cutter out. And press the plunger, and that will pop out. You'll get this cute little cherry pastry. And I end up with my 4 cutout tops and my 4 little cherry pastries. Now my cherry filling is nice and cool. It's like about room temperature. I could have also made this the day before if I had wanted to and just kept it in the refrigerator to chill. And I'll take a cup and I'll spoon out some of the filling. It's between 1/3 and 1/2 of a cup. We don't want to fill it all the way. We want to leave about 1 inch without any filling on it. So if you just divide this filling into the 4 jars, it'll work out perfectly. Now I'm going to take and put our little topper on. So I'll bring the jar over, place the top on, and I want to push it into the jar just a little bit. Again, we don't want any pastry overhanging. And again, you should be able to touch the rim and not really feel any pastry. And then to seal it, I'll take a fork and I'll lightly press it all around the edges inside the jar. And I'll take one of my cherries and I'll just lay it off to the side, just like this. Now as a finish, I like to take just a little pinch of sugar and dust the top. Now here's where we get to have a little fun. We get to decide, do we want to bake these all now, or do we want to bake some of them now and put some of them in the freezer to bake another time? Well, I'm going to do both. I'm going to bake 3 of these off now so I can show you what they look like, and then we can have them later for dessert tonight. But I am going to take one of them and put them in the freezer. Now, if you do decide to freeze these, you will need your lid and your ring. Now, because we've made sure that there's no pastry up here on that ring, I can put the lid on, put the ring on, and I can put this straight into the freezer. Now, since I'm going to bake these 3 and they are not frozen, I have preheated my oven to 375 degrees, and these will go in and bake for 45 minutes. Now, when I do want to bake one of the frozen pies, I'll take it out of the freezer. I'll remove the ring and the lid. I'll place the pie on a rimmed baking sheet on a piece of parchment, again, so it won't slide around as I'm moving it. But instead of putting it in a preheated oven, I'll put it straight into a cold oven. And once it's in, then I will turn the temperature up to 375. And the thing that's great about that is that lets the glass, which is frozen, warm up along with the oven. And I've done this lots of times and it never breaks, so you don't have to worry about it. It's because we're using a canning jar that this works out so well. And then put the timer on for 50 minutes, and then at that time you'll take it out and you'll have a lovely little pie in the jar just like this. Because I love these little pie in the jar so much, I'm going to be busy developing all kinds of fillings that you can add so you can make all kinds of different pies. Now, as I develop a new filling, I will put it up into my online cookbook, Cindy's Kitchen Cookbook. So those of you that subscribe to that, you will have a wonderful selection of fillings for these little pies in a jar. So you can see they're bubbling, that means they're cooked through. And look through the glass, you can see how nicely browned the pastry is. Now we definitely want to let these sit here and cool. Now once the little pies are cooled down, you can eat them just like this right out of the jar. They taste fantastic. Or if you wanted to take them on a picnic or pack them in a lunch, all you have to do is put the lid on and screw the ring on, and here is your pie in a jar. I also do this, like for example, when I'll have this tonight, I won't eat all of this, I'll only eat a few bites of it, but then I can put the lid on and the ring and save it for myself for tomorrow. These also make really great gifts, and let me show you how you can dress them up. Take your pie, take the little lid, put it on top, and then either get a paper doily or a piece of fabric and place it on top, and then you take the ring and you screw that down. And that makes a really, really cute gift for someone. Well, if you'd like to make a cherry pie in a jar, just go to our website and go to the Sweet World show notes, and I'll have the recipe there for you. Don't forget to join us on Facebook. We have a wonderful community of viewers from around the world there. And as always, if you have any questions or ideas for me, please send me an email. I'll see you next time.